So as you're looking at this, you see the two portions that we're working on trying to complete right now. We have this section in here, and as you see the two rear deck on the upper deck, the rear blocks to support the upper deck. And these are the fins that go along, the frames that go along the keel sun to support the deck, the mid deck. I will work on these edges at a lower point, but you can see when we put the lower deck and the upper deck in place, we're gonna have nails along the center spine and then along the outer edge so that we can keep this bowed down as a drainage for the water as what a real deck would be. So the next portion of this is to measure out the exact, of course it helps if I keep that straight, is measure out the exact center of this piece here. Now, it looks as if this is exactly 5 millimeters. So at 2.5, I'm gonna mark here, which is the very center of the gouge we have here. As you can see that on this diagram, it's right here. And then on the opposite side, since this is the primary deck, I'm going to measure the exact center here. The reason for me doing that is that I'm going to be able to mark where the center of the spine is going to be, and then mark the cross members of approximately where they're supposed to be, so that when I'm ready to add the nails, as you can see, this is one of the nail portions right here. When I actually add the nails, I'll be able to secure the top portion down on each one of the cross members and the spine to make this a very secure point. So, how do I do that? Excuse my mess, put away my toys. As you can see, I'm going to find the exact center. Now, this is the easiest way for me to do it. We use the 10, and then we measure out the exact number on each side, and it doesn't require us to think too hard. So, 5 and 15 with 10 being in the center, because that's what it looks like it is. And every tick mark outside of the 5 and the 15 will match on both sides, with 10 being in the center, and that's how I find out whether or not I'm balanced right. So right now, where I have my 10, I have 4.5 on one side and I have 16 on the other. So that means I'm approximately off by 5 millimeters. So if I go 2.5 millimeters on the high side, I should be able to get the same amount of marks on the low side. So that looks to be about right there. We mark that 5, 5, 5, 2.5, 5, and that looks to be right about there. This is where my center is gonna be, and this is where the 10 is. So when I do that, I mark a gray line here on the part that I need, and now since the upper deck part, if you can see the light, you can see the shadow of the outline here, then this will be where I start my upper deck. So I'm just going to continue that line straight. Now, I'm not going to make this one on the second part heavy. You want to know why? Because I don't know if I'm making a straight line, because I have nothing to reference it to on the back side, and we'll worry about that later. Now, of course, I don't have anything long enough, so now the straight edge will be to get from the center point we made down here to the center point we made down here, and we'll have a relatively straight line with 2 points at either end. Common math, common geometry and algebra and mathematics and all that crazy stuff aside. So I'll tell you what, we know this is long enough, and if this is relatively straight, we'll be able to mark a straight line on both ends. So I'm gonna move this out of the way so that it can dry properly. And that's my makeshift balance. So now You'll watch me make a straight line using the template we already have here. And of course, this is not 100% perfect, but it'll do for now. And then we'll just make a light line. And if you can see this gray line, you probably can't, but that's going to show you where the center of my deck is going to be, the exact center measured out on each side. And of course, like I said, if you'll do something pretty amazing, like using this template here, and I'm going to turn this light out so maybe you can see where the outline of the deck is. All right, of course I can do that and you'll see it real good, right? Then we'll pick any point along here, and as long as I use the 10 as the center line on where I put my mark, my original mark, which is right there, then you'll see 6.5, right, to that mark, and roughly 7 on this mark, which means I'm a little off, but you get the idea. We're relatively close. And if we pick another point, you know, on our line that we drew in, which is 10, you'll see here that I'm 6.4 on that side and 6.4 on this side, so we're relatively close. I'm gonna say you don't have to be 100%, but since I'm building this the first time, I'm trying to make it as close, as perfect as I can. So bear with me. Also keep in mind that that may not be, you know, the edge I use might not be a straight edge on this. So I will go back and verify that again at a later date to make sure that all my balances and everything work out right. In the meantime, I can probably check with this. Get my brighter light up in here and make sure that if I can put a straight edge on this, and it looks like I'm not too far off either way, the straight edge of the ruler looks like it fits on the line without too much issue. I think I'm gonna be okay. So I'm just gonna draw this a little bit darker so you can see it. And yes, I thought I had stopped my camera, so I went back to check. So that's the reason for the pause. So I put this in, and of course now you can see a much richer line to work with to make my center line. And I will stop back once I have all the members in place, and then I'll show you what that looks like and we can take it from there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna try and do something real interesting here. I'm going to lower the light a little bit and see if you can check out my panel lines that I made here and to see just how they look here. All right, now these are the tools that I use. I know this is gonna sound kind of crazy, but I want to see if you can follow along with me. First of all, I told you that the idea was to take this, all right, and since we had to use nails, like according to the print, to nail the deck down to the spine of the ship, I had to know exactly where each one of these members were in order for that to work. See this little nail right here, this little nail right here in the center right there? That's what I'm going to be using to secure the upper deck to the spine of the ship. All right, yeah, I didn't mean to throw that around like that, but you get the point. All right, so with that in mind, I used my handy dandy ruler, which as you can see is not quite long enough to do this properly. But check what I found out. If you use a seamstress tape, right, you can lay it right down into the gap, right? Maybe this is a little better. Lay it right down into the gap, and you got the 7 centimeter, You see, I'm a little careless. The same measurements on the tape that you have on your ruler. Of course, this is not a very good representation, so I'll do it like that. That way you can see the numbers on the ruler and the tape. Now, this is where it gets kind of deep. If you look at my chart here, right? Took out a piece of paper, wrote down the measurements with the ruler and the measurements with the tape, and both of them came within 2 millimeters of each measurement. So that's how I knew my numbers were, you know, close to being right. And of course, marking off the center of each point that measured on the tape and a ruler, and using a right angle ruler, a right angle square, I was able to make sure that my lines were relatively straight and squared off 90 degrees, as you can see on here. Now, once I pop this out of the edge of the balsa wood and place that on the deck and secure it, you'll see what I mean as far as where my cross members are going to be and where my keel is going to end up being and where I'm going to place my nails. So I will come back with a video once that's done. So this is the portion that I'm going to have in place there. Now for this little notch, you know, I use my razor to get in there real quick, and then I just use a little tool and boom, I take the notch out. So now the idea now is I could use a Dremel to sand it down, but rather than do it just like that, I can just shave off, you know, the portions that I don't need with my hobby knife, because that's sharp enough. As you can see me doing it, cutting it out here. All right, people, look at this amazing thing. As you can see, as we're trying to get some things done here, I wanted to show you, I put rubber bands along the frame marks here, right? As I got the temporary measurements and the guide on the lower deck. I found just the right rubber bands in order to make sure that the lower deck is totally on top of the keel sun and fits relatively tight when I put the glue in, minus a few little details. I might have to put a few more rubber bands in. But as you can see, this looks really, really good with the main deck in place. The braces in the back fit right where they're supposed to. So I want to show you this next phase here in a little bit. Almost perfectly centered. So once I get the glue in place, we'll put these in. We'll make sure that these are down and in place where they're supposed to be right before the nails go in, and I'll let you know how it works out in a few minutes. As you can see, sometimes it's easier to bend the nails than not, but in that regard, if you don't pound them flush, just remove them, start all over again. All right, everybody. Well, as you can see from my several foes there, that I have a problem with these teeny tiny nails that look like that. Ridiculously small. So I made a couple of mistakes, but I was able to find out a solution that may end up work for you guys. Now, I have these micro bits, and I mean, they are small, right? Micro box. These things are incredibly small. I don't know if you can see them, accurately enough, but there you go, right? So I thought of an idea. Start off with one of these teeny tiny bits, drill a hole, and then try to hammer your nails in, because you still gotta hammer them in. You just gotta make sure you have the right size bit. So, and definitely don't drill all the way through in order for you to have something for your nail to bite on. So now I've already tested this rather than share it with you and be embarrassed. So this is what it's gonna look like. So bear with me here real quick. I'm getting ready to show you. I have my drill on the lowest setting possible, and I set a dot here where I want to go with it. So I'm going to line this up as much as possible, and following where this is going to go, I set a little hole, and then I angle it to make sure that my pilot hole, right, is directly above the frame. And then I'm going to drill it deep enough to go into the frame, right, but not so deep that the nail will bottom out in there. So let's experiment here. So hold on. And usually you'll feel it once that happens. And then I take the nail, assuming that I'm correct, and I drop it down into the hole, right? And it looks like that's where it bottoms out at, right? So now, let's see if I'm right. All right. And as you can see, I just checked it out myself while I was off camera, but you can see it's flush, it's in there, and right where it's supposed to be. So, technique solved. I'm gonna do the rest of these and then I'll be back. So, look at the results. So, I went from 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4, or like 50%. I dropped down considerably by doing it this way. You can see some of the ones that are completely flush. As you can see, they're way more. And of course, on my center spine, they're almost invisible with how I did it. So the technique works a lot better than trying to do it individually. So remember, drill yourself a pilot hole first, put your nail in place, hammer it the rest of the way in, make sure you're hammering straight and you won't get too many bumps. This is my latest one, using my technique. Still though, I got it about as close, if not closer, than the ones I did without it. So instead of rushing, just take your time, be careful, and everything's good. And as you can see, I'm flush across the entire edge, all the way around. Everything is nice and tight. So, on to the next step. Okay, so as you can see, nice smooth line. When it's straight, everything is easy. I'm gonna show you how I did this. So, using my handy dandy flexible rule here and the line I already have in place, I'm just going to follow the edge of the ruler and make cuts in it until I get through the whole part and cut it clean and flush like that. All right. I know you can't see right down into it, but I'm working on a new camera stand, so you'll see the best of it later. Okay, well now you see, next phase is complete. Look at this, main deck and upper deck are in place. As you can see, I used my drill and nail technique to fit everything in place. I glued along the edge like I was supposed to, frame and keel son. Used the rubber bands to help force the bend, and used the nails to secure everything in place. So as you can see, relatively straight all the way down, minus a few changes. I may end up put a little filler along the top of the deck here. As you can see, that's what the upper deck looks like in place, and of course it's gonna have you're gonna see a gap on either side. If I press this end down, then this comes up. So I didn't want to soak this whole thing in place because I wanted a little bit of rigidity as well as a little bit of flexibility. So all the rubber bands will hold it in place. The nails will make sure everything is secure, and with the glue and the nails, this should remain a solid structure. So with everything in place the way it's supposed to be, we have a sailing vessel that looks relatively like that from the rear, and looking like that from the front side. So we're making some progress.